Welcome to the latest episode of Speaking of Changing Legal, a podcast from Morae. In this episode, Rico Burnett, who is a managing director, leading innovation and strategy at Morae, is joined by Justin Le Sar, who heads up business development strategy, for a candid and thought-provoking conversation about the reality behind AI in the legal industry. Together, they unpack what's actually changed, what hasn't, and why so much of today's legal AI feels more like a mirage than a transformation. From cost, risk, and quality, to trust, operating models, and the future role of legal professionals, this discussion challenges some of the most common assumptions shaping the AI narrative in legal today. Let's get started.
Today we're talking about a very, very interesting topic, the AI mirage in legal. Why nothing has really changed.
Interesting, Rico. I want to start with something that should be a simple question, but probably isn't. I know it's the talking point and on everybody's lips. AI in legal. Every firm, every vendor, every conference I've been to, the next door neighbor and his dog, everyone's speaking about it. Me, general counsel, sitting here today, what has actually changed for me in the last 2 years?
That's the right question to ask, Justin. I think if we're honest with ourselves, the answer is not much has changed. Look, I know that sounds a little bit provocative given how much noise there is, how many things we have to see around announcements, demos, LinkedIn posts. And then you ask me, what has materially changed for the person buying legal services? I think the answer is a little bit uncomfortable. Nothing is really foundationally cheaper. Not really. Hourly rates haven't come down. Fixed fees haven't meaningfully shifted. If anything, some firms are charging more for legal services because the work is faster now. And apparently speed now has a premium. The risk isn't going away. The clients are still exposed. Regulatory complexity is increasing and our cross-border obligations are multiplying. Nobody's actually really figured out how to use AI to make the risk smaller in a way that the client can actually feel that. We're still faced with clients and colleagues who read every single word, every contract, every clause, every red line, because I don't think the trust is there yet. And honestly, it probably shouldn't be there yet. Not now, and not in the way that most of what we see today has been implemented.
It's very interesting. What about speed, Rico? That's one thing everyone's pointing to. Surely that's real?
Speed is real, but speed was always coming. Right? Digitization was already accelerating cycle times. AI may have nudged that curve, but let's not pretend that slicing a few hours off a first draft is really revolutionary. I think this is an increment dressed up as a transformation. And maybe that's how I'd like to phrase our conversation. What we are looking at across most of the legal industry, not all, but most, is really a mirage. From a distance, it looks like progress. It looks like change. AI adoption numbers are up. Investment is flowing. The language has shifted. When you get close and you actually examine what's happening underneath, there's still very little behind it. The surface looks different and feels different, but the structure is identical.
That's interesting. Let's get close. Let's look underneath. Where do you want to start?
Well, let's start with something that doesn't necessarily get said enough or plainly enough. Legal knowledge is no longer gated. For centuries, really, the legal profession has operated on an information asymmetry. Lawyers knew the law, clients did not. And that gap was the foundation of the business model. You pay for access to knowledge that sits behind the vaulted ceilings and behind years of training, behind institutional memory that is very well guarded. And that era is pretty much over. Look, not completely. I'm not naive about this. But directionally, the trajectory is quite clear. Legal knowledge is almost becoming open source, Justin. You can buy in legal expertise now. You can subscribe to it. You can prompt for it. You can get a surprisingly competent first pass at a commercial contract or a privacy policy or a summary without even speaking to a lawyer. Remember, I was a practicing lawyer myself. I know what this industry looks and feels like. And that's really a big shift we see.
That's quite a big claim, Rico. So if the knowledge isn't scarce anymore, what exactly is the client paying for?
Exactly. And that's a question that is creating a bit of an identity crisis that few people, including ourselves, struggle to answer. It's something difficult to name. Because what's happening, Justin, is very quiet. It's the way in which associates look at the workflow and wonder what their role will be when the machines can draft faster than they do. It's a way that a partner will hear clients ask, why does this cost how much it costs and what is rolled up in that? And they don't really have a crisp, clean answer anymore because that mystique is fading. The idea that legal work is inherently complex, inherently artisanal, inherently beyond the reach of technology, right? That narrative is breaking down. Not because AI is brilliant. It's not. Because legal knowledge at its core is very structured. It's pattern based, it's referenceable. It was designed to be that. Anything that is structured and pattern based, you will be able to automate eventually.
It's very interesting. I mean, surely there's a difference between having access to legal knowledge and actually getting good legal outcomes. I mean, I can read a medical textbook. That doesn't make me a surgeon.
It's right, Justin, and I think that's the right tension. There is a massive gap between access to knowledge and good legal outcomes. Good legal outcomes, which is the domain and the purview of the legal professional. Just because you can generate a contract doesn't mean you should. Just because AI can summarize a regulation does not mean it understands the commercial context, the risk appetite, the relationship dynamics, the nuances of the jurisdiction, all of those things that make those regulations matter for your business versus somebody else's. And that's really the massive gap where real legal value lives and will continue to live and to thrive. But here's the problem. Most of the industry isn't really positioning around that gap. We're still trying to defend the old framework, right? The idea that the knowledge itself is the product. And I think that framework has broken down already.
As I understand it, there's this gap where real value exists, but the industry is depending on or defending a position rather that's already fallen. That must create some tension internally.
I think it creates more than tension. It creates something that we struggle to talk about openly.
It's interesting. What do you mean by that, Rico? I mean, what are people saying?
Look, Justin, people love these tools publicly, right? They demo really well, they present exceptionally well, they make for brilliant town halls, great client newsletters. We've invested in AI, we're innovating, we are future ready. But privately, I think privately people are very concerned. Because if these tools really work, right, if they really do what the brochure says, if they achieve what they've been designed to achieve, then the legal services business model kind of breaks down, right? And not in a theoretical, long-term abstract way, in a real way, a very personal way that would make even myself, right, you ask me, what happens to my role? What happens to my team? What happens to my revenue line? That's really the hard-hitting fact.
So you're saying there's quite a hope that AI, in essence, doesn't work too well.
In a manner of speaking, yes. I think there's this unspoken hope that AI, to an extent, fails just enough, right? It's impressive enough to talk about, but unreliable enough to still need people everywhere. Now we can come back to everywhere, but it does or should change the surface, not the structure, right? It should disrupt, but not here, not yet. Not us, not my team. And look, I'm not saying this to be cynical. I'm ever the optimist, as you know. But I do say this because I think it is an accurate description of where our industry is today.
Fair enough. And then how does this fear actually show up, Rico? I mean, because I imagine most people aren't saying this in their meetings.
Oh, no, they're not. And I think that's the thing, Justin. That fear doesn't show up as resistance. Now, that's quite obvious, right? Fear actually manifests as this over adoption with undercommitment. It's those pilot programs that don't scale. We celebrate innovation teams, but we never empower them. We adopt AI publicly and quietly make sure that it doesn't really touch anything that genuinely matters. Because if it does touch what matters, right? If it genuinely automates the review, the drafting, the diligence, the research, then somebody has to answer the question, where do all of those people go?
Very true. And I mean, that's not a technology question, right?
It's not a technology question. It's not even a strategy question. It's a human question. It's about belonging and purpose. It's about our industry and decades of professional identity being built on being an expert, an advisor, trusted counsel, and then suddenly wondering if that identity has a future, which is different from saying lawyers and legal advisors and legal counsel have a future. That is very much true. And that's very much something that we need to acknowledge as well. But this is really about where people see themselves in what's going to come next. And until we have those conversations, I reckon most AI strategies are really built on shifting sand.
It's an interesting stance. Okay. So we've got knowledge that's no longer scarce, an industry that's privately afraid and of its own tools, in fact, and then the identity crisis underneath it all. I mean, but tools are being adopted, money's being spent. So what's actually happening within all this investment?
I think that's really the heart of it, Justin. You've pointed to the pain point. This is the thing I want to come back to, and I keep coming back to until we all listen, right? The technology was adopted, but nothing else really changed. So I just want to make that point again. The technology was adopted, but nothing else changed.
In fact, that for me, what do you mean? Nothing else.
Look, it's still the same engagement model. The way that firms engage with clients, the way we scope and staff, we deliver, we bill. I mean, structurally, that is still identical to what it was 5 and maybe 10 years ago. Yes, we have AI that sits on top of that workflow. It's the same workflow. It doesn't really reshape that. It accelerates a process that was, in my view, already a little bit broken. So the same billing logic, whether it's hourly rates, fixed fees, that logic hasn't changed. We still work in an industry that pays for effort or pays for a price that was benchmarked against effort. So AI's great value proposition was to decouple value from time, but it hasn't really, because nobody's changed that commercial architecture that ties these things together. We have the same accountability. When something goes wrong, and look, things go wrong, the accountability model hasn't changed. An end client still bears the risk of the output. The firm has to manage its own risk in the way that it creates a drafting and limitations of scope and similar safeguards. AI hasn't really made anybody more accountable. If anything, it's probably created a new layer of ambiguity about who's going to be responsible when the machine gets things wrong.
So playing devil's advocate, from a client's perspective, what does this look like? Where are they, what are they actually experiencing?
I mean, here's how I would describe that to the clients I consult with. Right? You're still getting the sausage. The sausage is made slightly faster now, may have a nice and shiny new label. You still don't see how that thing is made. You still can't really trace the ingredients, and you are still relying on the same people who were making the sausage before. We've just added a bright, shiny new machine to the production line.
Uh, and then give me some concrete examples. I mean, where does this show up most clearly? Where are we seeing this?
I think it's all around us. But if you had to ask me about specific examples, let's chat a few of those. Let's look at the way that we are completing legal work, right? Firms are charging pretty much the same rates or even more because the work is now faster. So think about that. An end client is told that AI reduces cost, but instead that efficiency gain is captured and repackaged as if it's a premium delivery. The bill doesn't change, margins just improve. I don't think that's really transformative. I think that's just extraction. Then you come on to AI investment that's been captured internally but not passed downstream, right? So corporates, in-house teams, and firms are investing in tools, training teams, building internal platforms, but how much value actually reaches up to the end client? Are those investments not being made just to protect competitive position as opposed to improve outcome? And in many cases, the client is really subsidizing that investment through the unchanged fee models. And then the most significant one, I think, is that quality has not improved materially. Now, it's a hard one for people to hear, but I think that's still true. The output isn't demonstrably better than what came before, or what was just a logical progression from the digitization era we experienced a decade ago. In some cases, I think it's worse. We've got this false confidence that comes with machine generated text. It looks polished, reads well, but is the substance always there? And I think our human review processes just haven't caught up.
It's interesting. I mean, if I take that back to something you said a bit earlier, right? The trust piece you mentioned. Clients still reviewing everything?
I don't think we will acknowledge it publicly, but yes, I think most clauses, all outputs, the summaries, I don't think they trust the machine just yet. And frankly, could we trust the firm or the advisor or the consultant that implemented that machine really well enough? So what have we done? We've added a technology layer, but we've not removed that human effort from the client side. Now, don't get me wrong. Human intelligence will always define the success of the platforms, but are we not seeing end clients doing the same work they always did? Now, just doing that on top of AI output instead of human generated output. So I think that's where the value remains unlocked. It's not that AI has failed. AI has done what it was designed to do. It processed language, it generated the draft, it summarized documents. The tech worked, right? The tech worked. What didn't work and what hasn't changed, what wasn't really attempted, was changing that operating model. The right people with that intelligence, with that layer of human insight, incentivizing them to be a part of the process, creating the right commercial structures, the right accountability framework. Effectively, we didn't put the right people into the trust architecture.
It's interesting. So the technology worked, but the systems around it didn't move.
Exactly. Right. You can't lay a new technology on top of an old model and expect new outcomes, right? Putting a brand new engine into a suspension from the seas will lead to bad outcomes. And that's not how transformation works. That's how mirages are really built.
And I imagine this problem doesn't get better as the technology gets cheaper and more accessible, right?
I think it gets worse. I think it could get a lot worse.
How so? Because I think most people would assume cheaper tools is good news.
I mean, that's the instinct, right? That's what we want to get to, is cheaper tools, better access, faster adoption, progress. But I don't think cheaper tools fixes the problem that we have been describing. I think they scale the problem. If our operating model hasn't changed, if the model of engagement, the way that we bill, how we distribute accountability, that trust architecture piece we spoke about, if that's still the same, then the cheaper tools just means we're going to make the same mistakes at lower cost. We've got the same risk, same blind spots, a lack of that accumulated learning that has been built up by the legal profession over many years, for example. I think it's just cheaper.
It's interesting. And Rico, I mean, in your opinion, right, where are we on the hype cycle around this in terms of adoption? I mean, are people still buying in, or is this reality starting to set in?
I mean, good question. And I don't think we've hit that trough of disillusionment yet, have we? I think that cycle is still on the upswing for most organizations. People are still buying, a lot of piloting, a lot of investment. And that's brilliant, right?
Yeah.
But renewal cycles are coming, budget reviews are coming. And when they arrive, somebody has to answer a difficult question. What was the actual ROI in all of this? And you and I have discussions about ROI on a daily basis, not the theoretical return, not we estimate that we saved X hours, right? The measurable, demonstrable return to the client, that improvement in outcome. What's the reduction in risk? How has value shifted? And honestly, I think for many organizations and for the innovative law firms out there, that answer is quite thin. The investment wasn't necessarily structured to deliver value to the end client. It was structured to deliver efficiency and internal efficiency that does not translate into a benefit to the end client or the business operations itself. That's just cost optimization that we've dressed up as innovation.
It's very interesting. Now, what about the data problem, Rico? I mean, do people even know what's under the hood of these tools?
Oh, great question. I don't think most people do. I don't think they know where the data comes from. We don't know which models that gets trained on, and clients don't know what the output validation process is. Whether an AI assisted review was actually reviewed by a human with sufficient expertise, or whether it was just rubber stamped because the tool says this is all fine. And that comes back to the point I made about accumulated learning. Because engagement starts from scratch, because we avoid the AI and the machine touching what's really important, that cannot remember what it learned on the last matter in many cases. So the firms or the corporate clients using these systems aren't systemically capturing and applying what the technology shows us. The knowledge that should be compounding, getting more rich and more valuable over time, which is exactly what legal professionals have created, that is evaporating after every transaction, or at least after most transactions today.
Interesting. So bear with me here, Rico, right? I'm a client hearing all of this for the first time, right? Nothing's cheaper. Risk isn't lower. Quality isn't proven. The tools are getting cheaper, but the problem is scaling. I have to ask this question, but what exactly is the point?
I mean, that is the question, Justin. I think the answer is slightly less than comfortable. I believe at this point, what we are building are more elaborate mirages. The cheaper the tools get, the easier they are to build and the harder it becomes to see through.
All right. I want to push this from a client side a little bit more, because some people might be listening and thinking, okay, but how bad can it really be? What's the actual risk to clients here?
Great question. And let me try and be concrete about that, because it's easy for us to talk about this like we're academics, critiquing the state of the law and legal practice. And that is certainly not the case. The value for legal advice and legal guidance will remain for a very, very long time. But what it does mean to a client is we are now seeing an explosion of bad legal output. And not obviously ostensibly bad. That's easy to catch, right? It's subtly bad. It's just plausible enough. AI-generated contracts read beautifully, but may miss a very critical jurisdiction-specific requirement. A summary is 95% right and 5% definitely wrong, potentially catastrophically wrong. Advice that sounds authoritative because the language model is very good at sounding authoritative, regardless of whether the substance holds true or not. That really is the challenge.
Interesting. I mean, that's the dangerous part, isn't it? I mean, it looks better than ever.
It does. And let's be honest, this doesn't relate to all platforms, right? As the AI landscape in legal changes, there are brilliant products and brilliant platforms out there. But what we are seeing happen is the creating of this false confidence. Clients are receiving work product that's looking better than ever. The formatting is as clean as it can get. The language is precise. The turnaround time is lightning fast. And all of that creates a sense of quality that may not be there. A client reads something and says, this is solid because it looks solid. But looking solid and being solid aren't the same thing. And I think the gap between those two things is where the risk hides and where the models haven't changed to address that. So that means, are we not hiding increased risk behind better language? And that keeps me up at night, right? I don't think risk has decreased. It's been wrapped in better packaging. While the obligations are the same, the regulatory exposure is the same, the contractual commitments are the same. But the output that describes all of these things is smoother, more polished, more confident. And that's a good thing. But doesn't that polish now create the false sense of security?
So that's interesting. I mean, let's think about this for a second. The client essentially is absorbing risk they don't even know they're absorbing.
I think that's spot on, Justin. A firm that uses AI to accelerate delivery or an internal platform that is deployed within a corporate environment, right? Accelerating some kind of deliverable, but doesn't change how the outputs are validated, doesn't actually remove the uncertainty for those around the process. It just transfers uncertainty, moves a bit downstream to the client or the end user. So who's making business decisions based on work product when there is a new and somewhat poorly understood mechanism, right? And this is the issue. The brilliance of law is fading into business mechanics, right? Legal work is treated solely as an operations function, a process that can you optimize it, you can manage it better, you can automate all the workflows. And in many ways, that is appropriate. But the obligations simply don't fade with that. The requirements, the commitments, your fiduciary duty, your liability exposure, these are not business mechanics. They are real legal obligations with real consequences. And if you treat them as just another process to automate, you don't eliminate the risk. You remove the lawyer and the trusted advisor, and then you stop paying attention to it.
Tell me, Rico, I mean, from your perspective, what does someone actually do with all of this? If the tools aren't the problem, the model hasn't changed, where does the client even start?
Look, I mean, let's talk about how we would, as Morae, approach this, but I want to do that in a very candid, very open way. And let's start with this. We've lived this world. We've lived in it. We failed. We've backed the wrong tools. We've entered into partnerships that simply didn't deliver. We've built things that look amazing in a demo, but in production, they are challenged and they fall apart sometimes. We've sat in client meetings and said, this doesn't work the way we expected initially. But this is simply how we've approached being candid about the technological explosion.
Sure. Rico, that's a refreshing, honest thing to say in this industry.
No, thanks, Justin. I do think it is credible, though. I think anyone who's going to tell you today that they've figured all of this out, that they have the answer, the platform, the framework that makes AI in legal work, is either understating the reality or they've not been doing this long enough. So what we've approached and how we've approached this as Morae is not a product focus. It's really a set of lessons, right? Hard earned, expensive, sometimes painful, about what works, what doesn't work. And what we found consistently across working with clients across all jurisdictions in all practice areas is that the value really isn't in the tool. It's never in the tool. The value is in the understanding where a tool belongs to a specific operating context and where the legal advisor can focus on that context and specifically where it doesn't fit into a context.
It's interesting. So let me ask you this, Rico. You know, what does this look like in practice? If a client comes to you today, what are you actually doing with them?
I think it's the practice of all of this that is the most important, right? Look, we see it like this. We would like to help clients avoid expensive mistakes. And you do that not by telling them what to buy, but by helping them understand what they actually need. Because the most expensive mistake in this new world of legal AI is not buying the wrong tool, it's buying the right tool for the wrong reason. Now implementing that on top of the wrong business model and then spending a year wondering why nothing has really changed. The second thing we want to do is help clients decide where AI actually belongs and where it doesn't. Not every process should be automated, and not every workflow will benefit from AI. Some things, in fact, the critical things, will still need human judgment, human relationships, human accountability. And if we're honest about that, and we truly acknowledge the role of the legal advisor, and we know what that distinction is, rather than trying to AI wash everything, I think that's where we will uncover where real value lies for our clients and then for the industry at large. So that means, finally, focusing on outcomes, not tools. But don't lead with the tech, lead with the question, what outcomes are you trying to achieve? And we work backwards from there. Sometimes the answer involves AI and quite a lot of AI. Sometimes it involves a process redesign, but sometimes it just involves changing the commercial relationship with service providers and clients. Sometimes it's about doing less, not more.
Very interesting, Rico. I mean, I want to take you back to something you said a little earlier, right? Legal as an operating system. What do you mean by that? You want to break that down for me? Look?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Look, legal at an enterprise level is really an operating system. It has infrastructure, it has workflows, it has data layers, points of integration. And you don't transform any of that by just buying more apps. You transform that by redesigning the architecture. So it's not about selling AI. It's not about chasing every pilot. I think the challenge now is realizing that you don't have to be the flashiest new thing at every conference. What we want to do through redesigning that operating system is helping clients unlock value that they're not seeing. I think that value is often trapped deeply in misaligned models, broken feedback loops, even in technology that was adopted previously without that structural change to make it really mean something.
Yeah.
And that's really the work. It's not glamorous, doesn't make for a great headline, but I believe that that's the work that actually matters.
Okay. So let me bring back to where we started, right? We opened up the conversation asking what's actually changed. We spent the last 30 odd minutes pulling that apart, trying to understand that from a different perspective and deep dive a little. So where does this leave us? What's the question people should be sitting with after this conversation? What should people be asking themselves?
I think that's a great summary, and it's the same question we are coming back to. And it's also evident in every conversation we have, and not with clients and our law firm partners, but with our industry peers and vendors and with the skeptics. I think it all comes back to the same place. The question really isn't which AI tool to buy. It was never which AI tool to buy. The question is why, after the adoption cycles and the investment and the pilots and the announcements, the partnerships, the platforms, why has nothing meaningfully changed in the industry? Why is the client experience fundamentally the same? Why are the cost structures fundamentally the same? Why is the risk profile fundamentally the same?
Yeah.
And the harder question, what would it take to change that? Not incrementally, that's always been on the cards. Not cosmetically, that's where we face our challenges today. Not in a way that looks good on a board pack, but then dissolves under scrutiny. What would it take to genuinely, meaningfully change the way that legal value is created and delivered? And if I'm honest, Justin, I don't really have the complete answer, right? I don't think anybody does, but I do know it starts with a little bit of honesty. If we can admit that we've built something and that has great potential, but in many cases it is a mirage, that we've changed things on the surface, but our ground still hasn't shifted. Yes, and I know that that requires a willingness to change things that we've tried to protect, right? Those models, those incentives, those structures, those identities. But that truly is where the massive potential lies. And I'd like to conclude with that is the real work is understanding the true, incredibly important value that the legal professional and the legal advisor has. It's leveraging that within the right operating environment with the right AI technology that will really give us the value we need. And I think that that is the real work we have ahead of us.
I think you hit it on the head there, Rico. And I've really enjoyed unpacking this with you. And I think it's made for a really insightful conversation. I think we've answered some questions, or at least highlighted a couple of things that are big points of interest. And I just want to thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I think I found some real value in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Same to you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.